Hey, this is Idea Coaches, Cochise from State of MMA. Sometimes I like to take a break from weighing on the weight classes to talk about mixed martial arts as a whole. I'm going to be doing these State of MMAs quarterly now, where I'll be talking about January. The topics happen in January, February, and March. We're almost a quarter way done with 2012, so let's get into it. I first off want to start off with the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix that has finally got an announced date and coming to a close. Having Josh Barnett face up against Daniel Cormier. And here's the thing. This Grand Prix started off so great and so action-packed, well, at least on paper, and just kind of fizzled into nothing. I don't know what the winner would get now. I mean, they're going to be absorbed by the UFC no matter what, so they're not fighting for a spot with Zuffa. They might be fighting for the #1 contendership for the UFC Heavyweight Championship bout, but that's all up in the air. So ever since the buyout, that whole Grand Prix has been just derailed for some odd reason, which I don't understand, because if it's all owned by Zuffa, you probably would have more hype behind it as well, so you have two different sources of income. I do know that there's some issues with, Strikeforce and their deal with Showtime and some other legalities that keeps the UFC off Showtime, but that shouldn't really be a problem anymore, seeing that the UFC is now on Fox. The main thing is this. It's Josh Barnett's getting his California Athletic Commission fighting license renewed, which is a good thing. I know he's pissed hot 3 times, but this has me thinking. When I was looking this stuff up, I've noticed that so many fighters get caught in the state of California. And I kind of know why. I'm from California myself, and I know a couple of people who do, amateur boxing. And here's the thing: when you fight in California, they have 3 doctors look at you pee while you're taking the piss test. In other places where, like in Las Vegas, from my understanding, you just go in some room, you can switch out the urine and then give the doctor clean urine, even though you may be roiding or doping, or not doping, but taking some sort of illegal substance. I think that pretty much all fighters should be randomly tested. I don't know how much this would cost, but seeing how most minimum wage jobs have the budget to test their employees out, I'm pretty sure the UFC can do it for their 200, 300 fighter roster. Okay, so let's move on and talk about the welterweight division in the UFC right now. Damon Maia, former UFC middleweight title contender, will now be dropping down to welterweight. Now, I'm thinking this guy could be the next Ricardo Almeida. Ricardo Almeida was a guy who was a middleweight. He was doing okay, but everyone was scared that when he went down to welterweight, he'd be this, this brooding, jiu-jitsu dynamo or something like that. Ended up getting choked out by Matt Hughes, and then never really heard of again after that moment. The thing is that the middleweight division of the UFC is perhaps the most diverse in pretty much all mixed martial arts organizations going on right now. Even though there's not like a whole lot of standout wrestlers, you have like good wrestlers, you also have good strikers. It's more of a diverse set of fighters than it is in the welterweight division. I just feel that Damon Maia taking the drop down, he's going to be dealing with a number of fighters who have that just crazy upper body strength. Guys like John Fitch, Jake Ellenberger, Josh Koscheck, and so forth. So the thing is this: unless he's fighting people like Dan Hardy, Diego Sanchez, Diego Alvarez, I don't really see him going that far in the welterweight division. I mean, yes, I know in middleweight he beat Chael Sonnen, who's also a very good wrestler and very strong, but Sonnen just has very poor submission defense. Now, going on into the retirement of Nick Diaz after his loss to Carlos Condit, I just think that Nick Diaz just is purposely self-destructive. When they was talking about how much weed potency he had in his urine test against Takanori Gomi, they said he had to be high while fighting, and then he was smoking weed before the Carlos Condit bout, got caught, and he lost the decision, which a lot of people really don't know how to judge. I mean, you have to understand this. It's always been the 10-point must system in the UFC. That's exactly what Carlos Condit did. He beat him in the 10-point must system. Was it ever about damage? No, it's never been that way. So I don't know why somehow when people watch Nick Diaz fight, someone who's a very proponent of the old Pride rules and doing damage, somehow in their minds they change the rules just for him. I'm sorry, I like Nick Diaz too. I think Carlos Condit's boring as fuck. Even before that fight, even as a person, he seems boring. But the thing is this, he did beat Nick Diaz in the 10-point must system, and we have to live with that. One thing I wanted to talk about is that Nick Diaz, let me go back. Nick Diaz is actually said he's going to retire, but the thing is that, does that change the complexion of the welterweight division now they lost to Carlos Condit? I think not, because you have to understand that in Strikeforce, even though he had an amazing run, he fought a lot of fighters who were all stylistically to his advantage. Paul Daly, Cyborg, the White Man, guys who want to stand up and bang with him. But when he was in the UFC, he ran into that whole wrestling brick wall, with Sean Shirk, Diego Sanchez, I forget, there's another one he lost to. So the thing is this, if he was to somehow beat Carlos Condit, let's say he won the fight, would he be able to take on a John Fitch, GSP, Josh Koscheck? I think not. I think when he's going to hit the same wall again. He's an overall better and calmer fighter than he was back when he was first in the UFC. But at the same time, he's still the same style. So I don't understand what would change when he gets into the top of the heap of the UFC's welterweight division. Okay, so now that I'm done talking about that, I want to talk about the UFC in Japan. And UFC 144 was in Japan. It was actually a very, very good card. I actually think it was a good card because of the booking. This is actually one of the more fairest, evenly matched booking UFC cards I've seen in quite some time. But the thing is this. The UFC talks about having this global impact, but what do they really have in Japan? It's like no one is talking about UFC Japan today. We're only a couple of weeks away from it. We're like 2 weeks away from UFC Japan. No one's talking about it. No one's talking about if it was a success. No one's talking about the UFC going back to Japan. And I'm actually thinking that this is no more than the UFC's operation in Japan is no more than just a vanity project. It's just a slap to the Yakuza and the old Pride rulers to say like, yes, we can go into your country. But I think it's kind of like the Major Baseball League, where they have events in Japan. This is baseball talking about, but it's not that big of a deal. So I think the UFC will continue to have more events in Japan, but will it be anything like it is in Toronto or in Europe or Brazil? I think not. It's kind of like Abu Dhabi. Remember, Abu Dhabi sold out in seconds, and then they actually created a stadium for the UFC, and then they had to add extra seats for that particular event. Then the particular event was pretty boring. The co-main event, the main event, that being BJ Penn versus Frankie Edgar won, Damon Maia versus Anderson Silva in the middleweight championship bout. Ended up being boring. No one's talked about it yet. And then Dana was talking about after the post-fight interview how he's going to make it up to the Abu Dhabi fans. Has he done that? I haven't heard anything since. I haven't heard anything about the UFC going back to Abu Dhabi or anywhere in that part of the world. So, but speaking of Japan, I think one of the biggest things that's going on right now in terms of non-fighting MMA news is Quentin Rampage Jackson went out of his UFC contract. I feel conflicted this way because I think that both the UFC and Rampage are at fault here. In a smaller way, the UFC is really at fault because the thing is that they are trying to take Rampage's fans away. They've been putting him in boring matches like with Matt Hamill and Ryan Bader. Why not Tito Ortiz or Little Nogueira? I mean, that would make a lot more sense. In that way, I understand what's going on, but in what Rampage is talking about, how he doesn't like fighting or he doesn't want to deal with the UFC. You have to remember that back in 2008 when he lost to Forrest Griffin, he went crazy and they had some issue with a pregnant woman like having a miscarriage due to that incident. They later found out it wasn't because of it, but it made news, and then suddenly nothing happened, and then you never heard anything about it ever again, and it's kind of like no one talks about that anymore. anymore. And I really feel if I was Rampage, I'd be very grateful that the UFC's PR people really kind of kept that on the low. The thing is that Rampage wants to go into movies, but the problem is that for him to go into movies because of his personality and his fighting past, he needs to win fights to look like a badass, because for him, he is actually a good fighter in real life. So he needs to be winning fights. He can't be like Bob Sapp, where, you know, he's losing fights. Now Bob Sapp's really doing nothing outside of, you know, losing can matches in Indonesia or some shit like that these days. So for Rampage to propel off beyond his life in the mixed martial arts, or at least the UFC, he needs to be winning fights. And more exciting fights. He's lost his past too, which is not that big of a deal. He did beat Lyoto Machida. A lot of people felt that he beat him, but you know, in the record books, he beat Lyoto Machida. But the thing is that I just don't see the point of Rampage continuing to fight. He always complains about, you know, he doesn't want to be famous, blah, blah, blah. But then you go see his little MTV cribs or UFC cribs. He has Rampage on all his cars. So what's the point of that? The thing is this. It's like, where would Rampage go if he left the UFC and continued to fight? Dream, on Wikipedia and everywhere that I've looked on, it does not have an event scheduled anytime soon. ONE FC would probably be the most logical step. I don't see them offering the kind of money that he would require for his name. Bellator is pretty much out of the question. I doubt that the UFC. I'm pretty sure there's some legal gangster going on, making sure that Rampage doesn't go to Bellator. He can go to Titan FC with Anthony Johnson. I don't know where he would go outside of the UFC at this point, especially in the light heavyweight division, where the UFC holds the monopoly for that division. I can actually see him retire and then coming back to like ONE FC or the UFC or anywhere and then losing. He'd be kind of like Frank Shamrock in Elite XC. Other than that, right now he was scheduled to face Shogun Rua, and now he's going to take a year off to get surgeries on both of his knees. He's going to have like a double knee surgery, which he might as well just retire right now. I mean, he's going to be 35, 36 by the time he comes back. His knee's not going to be that great. I'm telling you right now. And then the thing is, it's just going to sell a big old line of excuses when he does lose. So it's like, oh yeah, my leg was bad, I need this surgery. There's no need for that. It's actually better for him to just kind of like ride off in the sunset now off of a loss to like a lower name, because if he loses to Shogun, he actually has more to lose in terms of his status, because people will remember that fight much more than the Ryan Bader one. I almost forgot it had I not did this video. Okay guys, so that concludes my MMA, the State of MMA. Right now I'm working on trying to make my picks for the show, for the John Jones versus Rashad Evans fight, and of course the Alistair Overeem versus Junior Dos Santos. I've scripted like 3 things for both fights, and I can't decide on a conclusion for either one, but usually those bigger fights come to me probably the day of me shooting the video. Other than that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care.